Welcome to this deep dive designed just for you. So today we're tackling something that might sound a bit dry at first, smart heuristics. But trust me, this is going to be way more interesting than a business school lecture. We're talking about simple rules of thumb that can actually lead to better decisions, especially in today's crazy, unpredictable world.
Think of it this way. We're constantly bombarded with information these days, and it can feel impossible to make sense of it all. So these smart heuristics help us cut through the noise and focus on what really matters.
So we've got this pretty dense academic article as our source material.
Yeah.
But our mission is to unpack it in a way that's both fun and insightful. And you know what really caught my eye?
What's that?
There's evidence that these simple rules can sometimes outperform even the most complex algorithm. We're going to dive into some real-world examples, okay? How Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos use heuristics in their hiring processes.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is that heuristics aren't just some random hack. They're rooted in how our brains actually work. They've evolved over time to help us make quick, effective decisions in uncertain situations.
Right, because let's face it, the world rarely throws us those perfectly predictable risk scenarios where we know all the probabilities. More often than not, we're dealing with uncertainty, where the future is murky and things can change on a dime.
Think about launching a new product.
Right.
Or leading a team during a complete market shift.
Yeah.
You don't have the luxury of endless data crunching. You need to make decisions, and you need to make them quickly, and you need to be confident in those decisions.
So what if I told you that sometimes stripping away complexity can actually lead to more accurate judgments? That's what they call the less is more effect. And it's backed by some pretty mind-blowing research.
It is. And one of the most striking examples is the hiatus heuristic for predicting customer activity. So think about a retailer trying to figure out which customers are likely to buy again. This heuristic simply says if a customer hasn't made a purchase in the last 9 months, they're likely inactive. Otherwise, they're considered active.
So simple.
And get this, it outperformed the fancy models used by 35 different companies.
That's incredible. So a rule based on just one piece of information, time since last purchase, was more accurate than algorithms crunching mountains of data.
That's right.
What's the secret sauce here?
It has to do with the fact that sometimes too much information can actually introduce noise and distract us from the most important signals. So the hiatus heuristic cuts through that noise and focuses on a simple, powerful cue. And this less is more effect isn't limited to business. We see it in fields like medicine, psychology, even sports.
Wow. So it's not about being lazy or avoiding effort. It's about being strategic with our mental energy. And that's where this idea of an adaptive toolbox comes in. It's like we all have this mental collection of heuristics.
Exactly. And just like a Swiss Army knife, different tools are suited for different situations. There are heuristics for choosing between options, for allocating resources, for learning from others. The list goes on and on.
Okay, I'm starting to see the potential here.
Yeah.
But if we've all got this toolbox, how do we know which tool to use when? How do we avoid just randomly grabbing something and hoping for the best?
That's where the idea of ecological rationality comes in, matching the right tool to the right environment. Heuristics aren't inherently good or bad. It all depends on the context.
So it's not about declaring one heuristic superior to all other. It's about understanding the conditions where each one shines.
Precise. Think of it like this. If you're trying to make a decision and there's one piece of information that's just screamingly obvious, the dominant cue, then a simple one-reason heuristic can be incredibly effective.
So it's like, ignore all the other noise. This is the signal that matters.
Right.
Are there any real-world examples of this?
Well, you mentioned Elon Musk earlier. His exceptional ability hiring heuristic is a great example of one-reason decision-making in action. He focuses on one key question. Can this person demonstrate that they've solved really hard problems in the past?
Right, because if you can overcome those kinds of challenges, you're probably going to thrive in a demanding environment like SpaceX or Tesla. But does he really just base his entire hiring decision on that one question?
He also factors in alignment with the company's mission. But past exceptional ability is the dominant cue. Now, Jeff Bezos also values exceptional ability, but he adds a couple more branches to his decision tree. He uses a fast-and-frugal tree with 3 simple questions. First, just like Musk, exceptional ability.
Right.
If the answer is no, that's the end of the line.
Right.
But if it's a yes, then he asks, would I admire this person?
Because who wants to work with people they don't admire? It makes sense that he'd want to surround himself with individuals he respects and can learn from.
Exactly. And the final question is this. Will this person raise the average level of effectiveness of the group. Bezos wants to constantly raise the bar, so new hires need to be bringing something special to the table.
So 3 simple yes or no questions, and you know your fate at Amazon.
That's right.
It's so streamlined.
That's the beauty of fast and frugal trees. They can incorporate a few key factors without getting bogged down in complex weighting schemes. They're a great example of how simplicity can be a powerful decision-making tool.
All right, so we've covered one reason decision-making, where one factor reigns supreme.
Right.
What's next in our adaptive toolbox?
Let's move on to equality heuristics,
Equality heuristics.
where all cues or alternatives are treated equally. This might sound overly simplistic, but it can be surprisingly effective in certain situations.
Give me an example of an equality heuristic in action.
Take tallying. You simply count up the positive features of each option and choose the one with the highest score. This might sound almost too basic, but it's actually been shown to be incredibly accurate in various domains.
Really? Where does this tallying approach work well?
Well, it's been used to predict things like U.S. presidential elections with greater accuracy than complex models. And when it comes to investments, the classic 1N rule,
Okay.
dividing your resources equally among all options, often outperforms carefully crafted portfolios based on elaborate algorithms.
Wait, so putting the same amount of money into every stock could actually be a smarter strategy
In many cases, yes.
than agonizing over complex asset allocations?
It seems counterintuitive, but spreading your bets equally can actually reduce risk and lead to more consistent returns over time. It's another example of how sometimes less is more.
Okay, my mind is officially bending. I'm starting to see how these deceptively simple rules can outperform complicated approaches, but we've only explored 2 types of heuristics so far, right?
That's right.
What's the third one we need to add to our toolbox?
Let's go social with social heuristics. These rely on information from others to guide our decisions.
So like tapping into the collective wisdom of the crowd. I've heard about those guess the number of jelly beans contests, where the average guess is often surprisingly accurate.
Exactly. That's a classic example of the wisdom of crowds heuristic.
Okay.
And there are many other ways we use social information to navigate the world.
Right.
Think about how much we rely on word-of-mouth recommendations when choosing a restaurant, hiring a contractor, or even picking a doctor.
Right. And in the business world, employee referrals can be a powerful way to source strong candidates.
Absolutely.
But I can also see how relying too heavily on personal networks could create a lack of diversity, potentially even leading to biased hiring practices.
You've hit on a crucial point. Social heuristics can be incredibly useful, but they're not without their potential downsides. It's all about using them thoughtfully and understanding the context.
All right, so we've got one reason decision-making where one cue reigns supreme, equality heuristics where all cues are treated equally, and social heuristics where we tap into the wisdom or potential biases of the crowd. It's like we're building this mental Swiss Army knife. But now I'm even more curious. How do we know when to pull out which tool? When are these heuristics truly smart? So we've got this amazing mental toolbox full of heuristics, but how do we know when to use which tool? When are these heuristics truly smart?
It all comes down to understanding the environment you're operating in and recognizing when a particular heuristic is well suited to that context. Remember that ecological rationality we talked about earlier?
Right, the whole right tool for the right job idea. But how do we actually apply that in the real world?
Well, let's go back to that dominant cue concept. If you're in a situation where one piece of information clearly outweighs all the others, then a one reason heuristic can be your secret weapon.
So it's like having a superpower, the ability to zero in on the most crucial signal and ignore all the distractions. But what about those times when all the cues seem to have roughly equal importance?
That's when those equality heuristics like tallying or the 1N rule can really shine. They provide a simple and surprisingly effective way to navigate those situations where no single factor is screamingly obvious.
Okay, that makes sense, but I'm also thinking about all the biases we humans are prone to. How do we guard against falling into those traps, even when using heuristics?
It's about being aware of our own limitations and understanding the potential pitfalls of each heuristic. Remember that lawsuit against the cleaning company that relied solely on word-of-mouth referrals? Their intentions may have been good, but it led to a homogeneous workforce and legal trouble.
Right, so even simple rules can have unintended consequences if we're not careful. It's like we need a mental checklist to run through before applying any heuristic. Like, does this rule make sense in this context? What are the potential blind spots? Am I missing any crucial information?
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to develop a deep understanding of how heuristics work, both their strengths and their weaknesses.
Yeah.
It's like learning to wield a powerful tool with both skill and responsibility.
This is all starting to click for me, but I've also heard that heuristics can be less accurate than complex models. How do we reconcile that with the less is more effect we discussed earlier?
That brings us to the bias variance dilemma, which sounds complex, but is actually pretty intuitive when you think about it. Imagine you're throwing darts at a target. Now, you can be wrong in two ways. You can consistently hit the same spot, but it's not the bullseye that's bias. Or your darts can be all over the board, but on average, they're centered around the bullseye. That's variance.
So bias is being systematically off target,
Right.
while variance is being inconsistent.
Exactly.
And you're saying that simpler models like heuristics tend to have low variance.
Exactly. They're consistent even if they're slightly off from the perfect answer. Complex models, on the other hand, can have high variance. They're more prone to being wildly off target sometimes, even if their average is close to the truth.
I see. So in those uncertain environments where things are constantly shifting,
Yeah.
a consistent low variance heuristic might actually be more reliable than a complex model that's susceptible to wild swings. It's like choosing a reliable old car that might not be flashy but consistently gets you where you need to go, versus a fancy new sports car that could break down unexpectedly.
That's a great analogy, and it highlights why heuristics can be so powerful. They provide stability and consistency in the face of uncertainty.
All right, I'm convinced, but this all feels very theoretical. Could you give me some real-world examples of how organizations are using heuristics effectively?
Absolutely. Remember how Cisco used that simple 75% rule for acquisitions? They required that 75% of the acquired company's employees join Cisco, and that the acquisition contribute 75% of its projected revenue within a year. This simple rule helped them make quick, consistent decisions and build a successful track record of acquisitions.
That's fascinating. So they didn't get bogged down in endless analysis and due diligence. They had a clear rule to guide their decisions. Are there any other examples?
Think about leadership. Those CEO heuristics we discussed, hire well and let them do their jobs. First listen, then speak, are born from years of experience. They're distilled wisdom that helps leaders navigate complex situations.
It makes me wonder if intuition, which is often dismissed as unscientific, is actually just a collection of unconscious heuristics that we've developed over time.
That's a really intriguing idea, and it links to what our source material calls contingency theories of leadership. The idea is that there's no one right leadership style. The most effective approach depends on the situation.
So a good leader needs a diverse toolbox of heuristics, just like we've been discussing. But it's not just about leadership, right? These principles apply to teamwork negotiation, even performance management.
Absolutely. Jeff Bezos's 2-pizza rule for team size is a classic example of a simple heuristic that promotes efficiency and collaboration. And in negotiation, the tit-for-tat strategy, cooperating initially and then mirroring your opponent's actions, has proven to be surprisingly effective.
It's fascinating how these simple rules can cut through complexity and lead to better outcomes. But it also makes me think, if heuristics are so powerful, why aren't they taught more widely?
Yeah.
Why do we often demonize them as irrational shortcuts?
It's a great question, and it highlights a real gap in our education system. We need to embrace the power of heuristics and teach people how to use them strategically. Sometimes the best decision-making tool is the simplest one.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
Well, that's great to hear.
I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light, noticing those dominant cues, seeking out simple rules, and appreciating the elegance of less is more. So here's a final thought for all of you out there listening to ponder. How might understanding heuristics change how you approach decisions in your own life? What simple rules could you start using to navigate the complexities of your world?
It's a great question.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.